Hey guys, Fox here, and today we're going to be talking about something which I don't think anyone saw us coming. This happened quite literally out of nowhere. So what happened, as you can see, is that Jeff Fisher is no longer coaching the Michigan Panthers, and instead going to be Mike Nolan. Now, from at least what I understand, there was no real inkling of this happening that I know of. So this was definitely the biggest shock hire slash stepping down of all of them. So without further ado, before we go into the details of Mike Nolan, what I think of it, let's just go to the Fox Sports article. USFL hires Mike Nolan as Michigan Panthers head coach. The USFL announced on Friday that NFL veteran coach Mike Nolan has been hired as the head coach of the Michigan Panthers. He immediately will assume the duties from former head coach Jeff Fisher, who is stepping down for personal reasons. We are honored to welcome Mike Nolan to the USFL family as the new head coach of the Michigan Panthers, said Daryl Johnson, the EVP of football operations. When Coach Fisher informed us that he needed to step down, we immediately started the challenging process to find another experienced, charismatic leader to replace him, while at the same time creating an excitement for the Michigan Panthers players and fans as we open our Detroit hub to start USFL Year 2. Mike was the perfect fit for that role. Nolan, who was 63, was the head coach of the Niners from 05 to 08 and has held numerous positions for an 11 NFL franchise, mostly on defense. I'm very excited to join the USFL and Michigan Panthers, Nolan said. Playing great football and competing at a high level is what the Panthers are going to be about. It will take a loud and rabid fan base to help us get there. I've experienced the passionate fans of Michigan and Detroit while coaching against the Lions, and I was always impressed. Our goal with the Panthers is to play with energy and pride for the entire state we represent. I want our fans to be proud to root for the Panthers. Nolan, followed his father Dick Nolan into coaching. The elder Nolan was also a head coach of the Niners from 68 to 75 and the Saints from 78 to 80. As the son of a coach, I was blessed to be around the game and football players for all my life, said Nolan. I love the game, but more importantly, I love the relationships that are created when competing for a common goal. My staff and I look forward to getting to work and beginning the process to make the Panthers the top team in the USFL. Nolan replaces Fisher, who stepped down. Fisher spent 4 decades as a football player and head coach and is a recognized rules expert who spent years as a member of the NFL competition committee. I've made the tough decision to step away from coaching in the USFL to spend more time with my family, including our 5 grandbabies, and enjoying my retirement to the fullest, said Fisher. USFL officials credit Fisher for helping the league pave a successful path, including last week's announcement that the Michigan Panthers were returning home this season to play home games in downtown Detroit at Ford Field. We are grateful for Coach Fisher's contributions not only to stand up the Michigan Panthers franchise, but also everything he did to position the USL for long-term success, said Johnston. Jeff added immediate credibility to our new league. He was a great teacher to his players, to his coaches, and was an invaluable resource for all of us at the league level. He was a tireless promoter of the USL, and his wisdom and experience were a benefit to everyone in the league. Coach Fisher played a critical role in USL Year 1 and will always have a special place in the history of the league. Now, yes, before I go into the stats of, Mike Nolan and all that, Jeff Fisher definitely deserves a lot more praise than Kirby Wilson. Whereas Kirby was just he's going to be remembered as a coach for the first year. Jeff Fisher, from what I understand, did definitely help a lot in the rules committee and overall getting the league up. Granted, as a coach, he was, let's just say, not the best, but he did help a lot in a lot of the, behind-the-scenes stuff in the league, more so than a lot of the other guys were. But now, as for Mike Nolan himself, there's a lot of people I've seen on, sites talking about this move, Reddit, Twitter, all that, and Instagram, and naturally, since it is social media, a lot of them are probably doing a little trolling. Because the fact is, or they're just caught in recency bias. The most recent thing that people remember him for is the DC as the Cowboys, where he really wasn't that good a defensive coordinator. But across his career, he was a defensive coordinator for 18 seasons. These are his defensive coordinator stats. Remember, overall defense is mainly judged by points allowed, whereas passing and rushing are by yards. But during his 18 years as a defensive coordinator, 8 of those years he had a top 10 defense versus 5 times as a bottom 10. So more often than not, he had a higher echelon defense than a lower end. He did have the league's best defense one year, which is actually the first year as a DC for the Giants. He had a top 5 twice. Now, in terms of the yardage stuff in passing and rushing is where his weakness seems to be. Rushing defense, he really wasn't the best. Yes, he had 5 seasons in the top 10 and 1 season in the top 5, but he was in the bottom 10 for rushing defense 8 times, and 6 of those times he was actually a bottom 5 rushing defense. As for passing defense, he's overall been an excellent pass defense guy. He did have one year where he had the worst passing defense in all of the league with the Falcons, but if you eliminate that, which naturally was his bottom 5 season, he only was in the bottom 10 3 other times. So yet the rest of his time, he was either really close to the higher echelon, as I'm pretty sure he was 6th in top 5 passing defense a couple times, but he was a top 10 in passing defense 10 times. So over half the time he was a DC, his defense were a top 10 unit in passing defense. It's a very solid thing to have. As for his head coaching record of 1837, he never had a winning record. He only coached 3 full years before getting fired. He was not the best head coach for that Niners team, but the Niners team is a pretty forgettable one, as that's kind of the early years of the Alex Smith saga kind of thing, where it just really isn't the most memorable of times. But overall, when you look at him, I think the fact is that people are probably putting too much on just the fact that the last year at the Cowboys, he wasn't great. But before that, I mean, you just got to remember, he was a linebackers coach for the Saints, and basically as soon as, I mean, remember, Demario Davis has been one of the best linebackers in the league, and it's not like, he was with the Saints his whole career, he was with the Jets, but when he came to the Saints, he got better, and a lot of that can be, helped by Mike Nolan, stuff like that. And the fact is that when he was a DC for a lot of these teams, yeah, they'd usually have 1 or 2 years of the bad defense, but for the most part, he had a really solid defense. He was definitely a better DC than Ray Horton was, who was the latest coach to be hired before Nolan. So I think that overall, Mike is a better coach. Now, naturally, I'm going to go put this in the comment of my top 8 coaches, which to think that since that video there's been 2 changes is insane, but I think Mike Nolan is actually the 6th best coach in the league. I think he jumps 1 spot higher than Fisher was, and I think he is a better coach than Todd Haley. I think that Haley is too much of an erratic guy, and I think that Nolan has overall proved through his coaching career that he is a solid defense guy. Though I don't think he's higher than Sumlin and DeFilippo, the other new coach, but I think he's overall 6th best coach in the league, which is an upgrade, but it's not a huge upgrade. So, as for the only other thing that I need to show is, what about the Panthers' defense? This is a defensive guy, so mainly he's going to be focused on the defense. Panthers' defense, at the beginning of the year, if you remember, was an excellent unit, but they overall completely tailed off at the end and ended up being arguably the worst defense in the whole league. They were tied for the most points allowed with the Maulers, and they were also tied for the least passes defended with the Maulers. So they had 2 stats they were the worst in. Sacks, they had like 15. Note that aside from the team below them, every other team had 20 or more. So they got completely outclassed by sacks. Remember, Chris Odom himself had I think it was 12.5 or 13. So Odom himself nearly had as many as the Panthers as a team had. The Panthers were also last in interceptions. They were 6th in forced fumbles, though in the yardage stats, they were mediocre. Their 5th in passing yards, I definitely think, is going to improve under Nolan. The rushing yards, I think, might actually go down a bit, but at the same time, with Robert, they, the guy they just signed, I'm just not the best with his name. I think that overall is the fact that I think that their team is going to be better with their defense. Hopefully, it's going to get better. They didn't lose that many players, and the only guy they've gained was a huge sign in Ndemdici. I'm going to have to get better at the name. But overall is that their defense should be getting better based on the players they get, and they might use that first overall pick on a defensive player if they do believe that their quarterbacks in Love and Eric are the best guys to have. But I think that overall, for this coaching change, I think that while it is a really just questionable thing to have a third coach change in this first offseason, I think that overall, both of these last 2 have been solid upgrades. And the one that you could argue wasn't a solid upgrade in DeFilippo over Fedora, you still got the best of the 3 hires, I believe. So I think that overall the USFL has actually improved their coaching staff from year 1 to year 2. I think that's the best way to view it. Instead of just viewing it of, they're losing a lot of coaches, that's terrible. View it as that they're getting better coaches overall. They still have, who I've always believed are the 2 best. They still have Mike Riley and Bart Andrus, who from the beginning clearly were 2 of the best head coaches and still are. Kevin Sumlin in the first half was probably the best team in the league, the Gamblers. So they still have solid coaches, and I think that that's overall the best thing for them. But this has been ZomFox. If you enjoy this content and want to be notified as I upload any videos, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell. And as always, Have a great night.